Hello, Hope School family. This is Darren Wilson. I'm the Director of Online Operations at Hope School of Leadership. I want to thank you for joining us for this podcast episode. This episode is going to help you think more deeply about Section 1 of Crown Financial Course. This section focuses on integrating our faith principles into our personal finances. Most importantly, it emphasizes trusting God as the ultimate authority in all of our financial matters and calls on all of us to examine our own trust in God as He provides for us. So let's jump into this deep dive, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at some foundational ideas about handling our finances. Our source, Crown Financial Section 1, it offers a really distinct perspective on this, one that, might feel quite different from maybe our everyday ways of thinking about money.
Yeah, it really does.
It even starts by pointing to Isaiah 55:8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways.
Right, so it immediately signals, hey, this might be a different way to look at things.
Exactly.
And the material stresses that, well, even though we can't see God, that doesn't mean He's detached from our lives, especially our finances. In fact, it argues He's deeply involved, and how we view Him, our understanding of God, that really shapes things, particularly how we manage what we have.
And there's a key word the source uses here, Lord.
Lord.
Which it defines as final authority. That's a pretty powerful term.
It really is. It implies a level of oversight that's, well, more than just casual interest.
Right. So our mission in this deep dive is kind of to unpack some of the core ideas from this specific viewpoint.
Yeah.
We're exploring a path that the source suggests could lead not just to maybe a closer relationship with God, but also some very practical outcomes.
Like what?
Things like less debt, maybe more savings, more giving, and just a greater sense of financial peace.
Yeah.
Contentment.
Exactly. It's about connecting those two sides, the spiritual and the very practical. The source is basically proposing that really getting and living by these principles can bring real change to your financial well-being. Things like contentment, hope, even confidence.
Okay, so let's dive deeper then, starting with what the source calls the trust factor.
Yes. Trust.
This seems absolutely central to this whole way of thinking. It jumps right in with Proverbs 3:5-6.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart.
And lean not on your own understanding.
Yeah.
In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight.
That's a pretty strong start, isn't it? It is. And the source makes a really key point here. Trusting God with finances, it's not like a one-time decision.
Oh, okay.
It describes it more as something that grows with ever-increasing levels of commitment, throughout life.
So it's ongoing, not just checking a box.
Exactly. It's a commitment that deepens.
Now, here's where I found it really interesting. The material sort of poses this idea that our everyday money choices, they often bring up this hidden question like, do you trust me? Where are your limits?
That's insightful.
It really makes you think about all those little decisions, spending, saving, giving, and whether we're maybe unconsciously drawing lines like, okay, I trust this far, but no further.
Precisely. It highlights that maybe we agree intellectually with trusting, but our actions, they might show we have these unspoken conditions.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like maybe you trust God for your regular paycheck. That feels secure. But then investing or maybe giving generously when things feel tight, that feels riskier, outside your control. That could reveal a limit, a boundary on that trust in the bigger picture.
And then the source just lays out the options for where we place our trust. It says, the deceptions of the enemy, our own judgment, the crowd, or the wisdom of the Creator.
Yeah. Pretty stark choices.
It is stark, isn't it? It makes you really evaluate what's driving your financial engine.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that our own judgment is listed there. Doesn't the source also value, wisdom and being careful with money? How does it square relying on God versus just being irresponsible?
That's a really important question. And no, the source isn't saying abandon common sense or practical wisdom.
Okay.
It seems to frame that own understanding from Proverbs more as maybe limited human perspective or being driven by fear or what everyone else is doing, cultural pressures.
Right.
As opposed to a wisdom that's rooted in God's principles. So it's more about aligning your judgment with that higher wisdom, not throwing judgment out.
Okay, that makes more sense. Aligning. And to really hammer this home, the source brings up Joshua.
Yes, his declaration.
But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Just a clear, firm statement of where his trust is planted.
Yeah, that's a powerful example. It shows that conscious choice, that commitment, not just for him, but his whole household, aligning with that core trust.
And understanding who you're trusting is key, right? Which leads into the next part.
Exactly. The source then explores, well, who is the Lord? It digs into defining this authority.
Yeah, and he uses some really powerful biblical references to show the scope of God's authority and involvement. It kicks off with Isaiah 51,
verses 12-13.
asking, "Who are you, that you forget the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth?" So it's a pretty grand stage, doesn't it?
It really does. Cosmic scale. And then it builds on that, highlighting God as Lord of the entire universe.
Right, quoting Isaiah 40.26.
Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. It uses the sheer vastness, the order of the cosmos, as evidence of that power and authority.
And it doesn't just stay way out there in space.
No, it brings it right down to earth. Explaining God as Lord of the nations, it references Acts 17.26.
Which is?
He made every nation of men, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live.
So suggesting involvement even in history, geography?
Exactly. The idea that, borders, the rise and fall of civilizations, maybe these aren't just random events. Perhaps they're part of a bigger design. It gives a different lens for looking at history.
And then it gets even more personal, describing God as Lord of the individual.
Yes, quoting Psalm 139.16, which is incredibly intimate.
What does it say?
All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be.
Wow. That speaks directly to a personal plan, doesn't it? Like for each one of us.
It really does. It suggests this incredible level of detail, of knowledge, of intention for every single life. That our existence, our journey, it's not just accidental, it's purposeful.
So summing up this section then, the source is painting this picture of God having immense power, immense control from the galaxies down to the details of my life and your life.
That's the picture, yeah.
Referencing Jeremiah 32.17, nothing is too hard for you.
Yeah.
It's a very comprehensive view of authority.
It is. And the whole point, it seems, of laying out this huge scope of God's lordship is to build the foundation for trusting him with finances. The logic is kind of, well, if God's got this level of control and power everywhere else.
And maybe trusting him with my bank account isn't such a crazy leap.
That seems to be the implication. And thinking of him as final authority financially, it's probably less about him micromanaging every penny.
Right.
And more about you aligning your priorities, your decisions with what you believe his values and principles are, the ones outlined in this material.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so then the material shifts gears slightly to applying the principles.
Making it practical.
And it does this by just asking some really direct questions for, personal reflection. These aren't rhetorical. They're meant to make you stop and think.
Okay.
First one. How do you show your trust in God through the way you live your life? Pretty broad, but fundamental.
Yeah, it forces you to look beyond just saying you believe. How does it actually play out?
Right.
In your daily actions, your choices? Where do your priorities really lie? What gets your time, your money, your energy? That shows where the trust actually is.
So if someone feels like, yeah, I trust God with the big stuff, but they, really struggle with everyday money choices, where does the source suggest the real work needs to happen?
That's a great point. The source seems to imply it's in those daily acknowledgments, those consistent small choices that show where you're really placing your reliance.
Less about grand gestures, more about the day-to-day.
Seems like it. Accumulating those smaller acts of faith.
Okay, second question. How do you know God cares for you and loves you? This feels more personal, about relationship.
Definitely. It taps into that motivation for trust. It's about, well, how do you personally experience or recognize that care in your own life?
Yeah.
It's about perception, interpretation. Do you see evidence of his care? Maybe in circumstances, relationships, moments of provision, guidance. The answers here are often really personal, and they can strengthen that trust.
Third question. What does God have to say about money and riches? This gets right to the financial piece. Encouraging you to actually look into the source material and related texts for specific guidance on this topic.
Right. It's an invitation to study these principles, to understand the perspective being offered,
Yeah.
to maybe move beyond just the usual cultural ideas about money and wealth and consider this different viewpoint.
Does this viewpoint say anything specific about, say, debt
Well, this framework seems to suggest that by trusting in a larger provision and focusing on principles like stewardship and contentment, you might be less likely to get into debt driven by fear or just wanting more stuff.
Okay, interesting. And the last question.
The fourth one. Do you handle your finance as if God is Lord over all?
Bringing it all together.
Exactly. It's the bottom line, really. Does the way you actually manage your money reflect this belief that God has ultimate authority in that area?
So does your financial planning, your spending, saving, giving, is it all done with that awareness, that acknowledgement of his lordship?
That's the challenge, aligning the financial life with the stated beliefs.
These are definitely questions to chew on.
For sure.
And the source finishes with a prayer focus, which feels like a really natural follow-on from those questions.
Yeah, what does this suggest?
It says, Lord, increase my vision of who you really are so I can trust you more and worship you more fully. Lord, please increase my trust in you and my reliance on you.
That prayer really captures the essence of the material, doesn't it?
It does.
A request for deeper understanding of God, and then that desire for more trust, more reliance, which the source argues is, well, foundational for handling finances according to these principles.
So wrapping this up, our deep dive into this Crown Financial Section 1 really lays out a framework for money that's deeply rooted in trust. And in recognizing God's ultimate authority, it's a perspective that might be quite different from how many of us usually operate.
Absolutely. It invites you to really examine the basis of your financial decisions, to consider if maybe a deeper trust in what it describes as God's lordship could lead to, well, a more fulfilling and maybe even more secure financial life, and a closer spiritual connection too.
Right. And on that note, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Reflect on those options. For trust as the source gave us deceptions, yourself and your own understanding, the crowd, or the Creator's wisdom. Which one really drives your financial choices most often right now?
Yeah, that's a challenging reflection.
And maybe think about what the implications of that choice might be. For your sense of contentment, your feeling of security, long-term. Something to mull over. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for spending some time with us today, thinking deeply about Section 1 of Crown Financial. Hope you have a good week ahead, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.